This AI rendered representation of the proceedings in the United States versus Sean Combs is based on the official court transcripts.
By March 5th, 2016, you were employed with this company for approximately 9 years. Is that fair to say?
Yes?
And you've written incident reports before. Is that true?
Yes.
And in the incident report, you told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury it's the who, why, where, when, what. In the incident report, basically every detail. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And the reason that you do every detail is because, or significant detail, is because it's important because later other people who did not witness what you witnessed may want to review your notes. That fair to say?
Yeah, the hotel staff, yes.
It also helps you memorialize for your memory what was significant during that time, true?
Yeah.
So we don't have to rely on your memory. It's now 2025. So we're approximately 9 years after March 5, 2016, right?
Yes.
So that incident report that is marked and admitted into evidence that the jury saw, that is a good rendition by you. Best of your ability at that time, fair to say?
I remember everything in detail, yes.
And that is why you make it promptly. You made it during or right after your shift that day, right?
Yes.
That's why you send it out to all these other people, so you can get feedback if anything is missing, like you did in this case, true?
Yes.
You get to review it, right? You read it over before you send out the email.
Yes.
And this is something that is not unique. It's part of your training, your experience, and what you do in that position.
Yes.
Now, I would like to ask you a couple of things about that report, that incident report that you did. Just you explain, if you don't mind. You mentioned that when you get off the elevator, the first time you get off the elevator, approximately 11:14, 11:15 a.m. Pacific time that day. Okay, you describe Mr. Combs as having a devilish, scary look in his face. Do you remember saying that to the jury?
Yes.
If you need to review it, where in your report, that incident report, do you ever describe Mr. Combs like that?
It's not, it's, that's my opinion, so it had nothing to do with the incident.
Okay, that has nothing to do with what happened that day. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, with the incident.
That is just your opinion now?
No, it was my opinion then and now.
But you didn't put that in the report?
Again, it was my opinion.
Answer my question if you don't mind. It's not in the report, true?
No.
And when you get off the elevator, you have something in your hand. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that is?
My radio.
And tell us who the radio communicates with, if you don't mind.
The security officers.
Before you even went up to the 6th floor, the reason that you called your coworkers to come closer, come off the outside perimeter, and come off the other interior of the building and come to the base, true?
Yes.
And you did that because you really don't know what you're getting into and you may need assistance, is that fair to say?
Yes.
And they may need assistance, whereby you say you even have to call outside assistance like the Los Angeles Police Department or the LAPD, true?
Correct.
So there in the base, you have your walkie-talkie, your radio, and you never call for assistance, right?
No.
Mr. Combs did not attack you?
No.
True?
Yeah.
He was cordial to you, that's my word, but you describe it any way you want?
Yeah.
He was cooperative, right?
Yes.
And when you see it and everyone saw it on the video, he's actually, when you first come, he's sitting in a chair, fair to say?
Yeah.
And we see him reverse, like you said, because it's through a mirror, so everything is transposed. True?
Yeah.
And he doesn't make any aggressive movements towards you?
True.
You don't see him make any aggressive movements towards the lady, do you?
No.
Now, you say that the young lady Cassie has a purple eye. Do you remember telling the jurors that?
Yes.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury where in your report, if you need to see it, it's no problem. You wrote that she has any type of discoloration to her eye?
I don't recall on my report.
Do you need to see it?
Sure.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, it's already an evidence over objection, 7R 141. If you can just scan this, take as much time as you need. If you need it blown up, just please tell the gentleman he will do it. Point to the jurors and where you say that Cassie has a purple eye.
It doesn't.
I could not hear, I apologize.
It doesn't.
It does not?
No, not on this email.
Now, that would be significant, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because you have to know if somebody gets injured on your property. That's important for not only you, but your coworkers to know, true?
Correct.
There could be civil lawsuits, right?
Yeah.
Law enforcement could get involved, right?
Yeah.
Now, in this particular case, just make it clear, just please make it clear, was there any law enforcement involvement in this case from your knowledge?
No, we didn't call him.
Did anybody, and when you say we didn't call them, did anybody to your knowledge alert law enforcement to come out and investigate this case at that time?
No, sir.
You took the time to video to show your wife. Do you remember?
Yeah.
You explained that to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury? Yes?
Yes.
And you, in fact, kept that video, right?
Correct.
And people were talking about this even after your day off. Come back. Another officer said, hey, would you do me a favor and take your time and show me the video? Remember looking at it and it self-erased, you thought?
Yes.
You then showed your other coworker your video on your cell phone, right?
Yes.
And never during any of that time, to your knowledge, was law enforcement called true?
Correct.
Okay, now, when you talk about Mr. Combs, I think you told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury saying that Cassie wanted to leave the hotel, and he said, "You're not leaving," or "owe me," thing to that effect. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so with the court's permission, it's already an evidence over objection. 7R 141, if that can be shown to you if you need to see it. Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury if you put that in your report.
I'm sorry. What was the question?
Where in your report, or if it is in your report, I'll ask first. Did you ever say that Mr. Combs, excuse me, that Cassie said, "I'm leaving the hotel," and Mr. Combs said something to the effect of, "You're not leaving"?
I don't believe it's in the report.
In fact, the opposite is in your report, isn't it?
What part?
Mr. Combs, it's in the second paragraph if you need to see it, fifth line.
Yes.
Mr. Combs. We walked over, it's in the center of the fifth line. We walked over to his room, 602, meaning Mr. Combs' room, right?
Yes.
And excuse me, went inside, it says, and Miss Cece was told to leave by Mr. Combs, so she did just that. Do you see that?
Yes.
So you can look at everything. Where in here did you ever write what you told the jurors today? The significant fact that Mr. Combs told Cassie she could not leave that hotel?
At that point, I didn't believe it was a significant fact because, again, they are just going back and forth. So I'm not going to put something like, he told her off. I'm not going to say that. He said to leave eventually, and she left.
So you wrote down what you just said, that Mr. Combs told Cassie to leave?
Yeah.
And she left, but you didn't write down that Mr. Combs told her she could not leave?
Yeah, because it's not important. That's him just telling her don't leave, and me telling him she is going to leave. And then he says, you're going to leave. So of course I don't put, he told her that she needs to leave.
Officer, if it's not important, we're talking about 9 years later.
Correct.
You remember the unimportant detail 9 years later, but it's not important enough.
I remember most of the incident, sir.
Let me just finish the question.
All right.
It's not important enough to write in the report that you're sworn to do at this time, to put in all of the important information? Yet you remember to this day, that's what you're telling the jury?
Objection.
It's overruled. I wasn't sworn to do it. It's observing reports, sir. So whatever, as a security guard, whatever I put in the report, that's pretty much what it is.
With regards to the bribe, do you remember telling the jurors that Mr. Combs held up a stack of money? You noticed a $100 bill. And you're fair. You say you don't know what the other bills were.
Correct.
They could have been dollar bills, I guess, is what you're saying.
Correct.
But you took that as a bribe, right?
What do you mean I took that as a bribe? What he was offering?
Well, I was just using your word. Maybe I misheard you.
Yeah,
On direct examination with the prosecutor, you used the word, "it was a bribe"?
100%.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Now, before going, that was at the room. Do you remember telling the jurors that?
Outside the room, yes.
That you were already leaving. Just to set the stage, you were walking back towards the elevator hallway or elevator lobby,
Correct.
and you wanted to see if you could catch up to Cassie?
Yes.
She had already left?
Yes.
Mr. Combs was in his room?
Yes.
No incident, right?
Correct.
And when Mr. Combs then says to you, I'm not saying shout, but gets your attention, holds up his hand the way you describe, holding the money, whatever amount of money it is, you took that, you said it was a bribe. I want to ask you a couple of questions, okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you first saw Mr. Combs and he's still sitting in that chair when you're first off the elevator, you made it known, I guess it's obvious, but you made it known that Mr. Combs is going to have to pay for the damage?
Yeah.
And later you explained to Mr. Combs on the way down to the hallway, correct me if I'm wrong, that he's going to have to pay for that damage, right?
Yes.
And then when you get to his room, he has a stack of money and he holds it up to you, right?
Correct.
And you take that as a bribe?
Yeah, that definitely.
Okay, now, with regards to Mr. Combs having money on him when you first see him in the chair, is it fair to say, to your knowledge, he's really in a towel and socks? Is that what it looked like?
Yeah, that was what he was wearing.
He didn't have any access to have any money, to have money on him at that time?
Correct.
He couldn't give you any money.
We don't take money.
I'm not saying you would take it. He didn't offer you any money, let me put it that way, when he was in the chair. He didn't have access to money, right?
Correct.
Okay, now I want to talk to you about the gentleman who you say you saw in the bedroom or in the hotel room, okay? So you described to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that there's a gentleman. When you are walking down the hallway with Mr. Combs, Cassie is behind you. She needs her items. You said a bag, right?
Yeah.
Cell phone?
Cell phone and a bag.
Fair?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Combs enters the room. There's no way to have this on video, and that's just the way it's set up. You see the hallway, but you don't see the entrance to the room, right?
Correct.
And you describe it that Cassie is in the room with Mr. Combs and you wanted to observe them. That was just part of your job, fair?
Correct.
And that is when you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that there is this other third party, right?
Yes.
Okay, I would like you to explain why in your incident report that is not there. If there is any more explanation than what you said on direct.
No, same thing. It was irrelevant. He didn't engage with nobody, and he wasn't at the lobby as well.
But again, you just remember that 9 years later?
Yeah, anybody would remember an extra person sitting in the corner of a bed not doing anything.
Why?
Because this is an altercation going on, and then there is just someone just sitting there. That's probably something that I would remember.
Did you think it would be important at that time to ask that gentleman for his name?
No,
Why?
because he wasn't involved in their altercation or what they were arguing about.
How do you know?
Because he wasn't talking to nobody.
Did you ever follow up on video? Because there has to be video of that gentleman leaving the room, right?
Correct.
Did you ever bother to use your cell phone and record that person leaving the room?
No.
Did you ever talk to anybody that there was a third party in that room?
Nope.
But you remember it today?
I remembered it, yes.
I want to talk with you about the 7-foot gentleman. Do you remember describing that to the jury?
Yes.
That's pretty tall, right?
Yeah,
That's something to remember, right?
100%.
And this is somebody who's in a car, right?
Outside of a car, yes.
And when you say outside of a car, describe what that...
He stepped out of the car, approached myself and Cassie, and then that's when he said that she wanted to leave.
Okay, do you know who this person is?
No, sir.
Do you know if this person was a member of the family of Cassie or she knew him from other places?
She didn't know him.
How do you know that?
Because the interaction that they had when I was about to leave.
Just the demeanor with each other?
Yes.
Okay, now you see the car pull up, right?
Yes.
And you see Cassie then leave with that gentleman, true?
Yeah, they were talking, and when they came back, they were gone. Yeah.
I would like you to look at, again, what's been entered into evidence by this honorable court as 7R 141. It's in the third paragraph. It starts with, I took the elevator down. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you saw Miss CC? Just for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, CC is the same person we're calling Cassie, right?
Yes.
All right. You advise her that you did not want him, that means Mr. Combs, to see her. So you walked over to the valet office until her ride got there, right?
Correct.
And you asked her that we would need some information from her to stand by. And then you walked over to MOD 80's office. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, do you ever write anything in your report at any time that there was this conversation about the 7-foot person saying she's leaving or anything like that?
No.
Do you write anything in there? You told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that you told Cassie, hey, you could come with me and nobody will see. We'll go to another office and no one will see the law enforcement.
Nope.
That's not in here either, is it?
No, sir.
But you remember all that today?
100%.
Isn't it important to tell your coworkers and for your memory, that you offered to call law enforcement and the guest refused?
I guess it goes either way. Because if she refused, I mean, that's where it ends. I don't have to tell anybody. Obviously, I'm the supervisor. I'm the assistant director right now. So if I'm the one that is doing it, then I don't need to tell my guys that that's what I did. If they did it, then they would have told me, hey, sir, this is what we did. We offered this. They said no.
But you're second in command by that time?
Correct.
You're not in command?
Nope.
Second of all, isn't it important to show that you, as a representative of the hotel, offered to have the patron who you say had a purple eye? You're encouraging the police to come. You're encouraging the person to call the police. You're encouraging the person to wait with you. Wouldn't that all be important to put into your incident report?
No, because I already had talked to A-Day when I went to go get him. I told him exactly what had happened, so I was in conversation with all of them. I didn't need to write it in the email. Like I said, that email just states what happened. And I don't need, what you're saying is I need to add extra pieces to this email that have nothing to do with what happened. So if I made a left turn, I'm not going to write I made a left turn, sir.
You compare somebody with a purple eye who refused police to somebody making a left turn?
No. What you're saying is that I needed to put that in there, even though I had already spoken to the hotel manager.
All right. Did you describe for the jury that when Mr. Combs thought that 80 was recording him? Do you remember that
Yes, sir.
situation? Did you say that you put Mr. Combs against the wall?
Yes?
That's a pretty aggressive move, wouldn't you say that?
Yeah,
I mean, you could hurt somebody when you put them up against the wall.
it depends. Yeah, because I wasn't aggressive. I just placed him, I put my hand on him and told him to let go of the phone.
Where did you put your hand on his chest?
On his chest.
Neck area?
Chest.
And you shoved him back into the wall?
Yeah,
And you did it with your forearm. That is what you just did.
correct.
For the ladies and gentlemen of the jury,
Yes, sir.
And put your weight behind it,
No, just my forearm.
is that the part of the body that you touched Mr. Combs? You pushed him against the wall?
His chest level, his chest area.
In 7R141, in the third paragraph, the eighth line, actually the seventh line to the left of center. Do you see where you wrote he, meaning Mr. Combs, saw MOD A-Day holding his phone, and he, meaning Mr. Combs, automatically assumed he, meaning Mr. MEOD A-Day, he, meaning Mr. Combs, was being recorded. So he, meaning Mr. Combs, grabbed MOD 80's phone. And then I grabbed his hand and told him to back off, as we took his hand away from MEOD 80.
Correct.
But today you remembered as you put your forearm into his chest?
Yeah, I put my forearm in his chest, and his hand was there because he was pulling on 80's hand, trying to take it away. So if you're pulling, right, your hand is here. I put my hand here, and I'm grabbing his hand, so yes.
But that's not what you wrote in the report?
But I grabbed his hand, yes.
But you didn't put that you put him up against the wall?
Again, what you want me to do is add stuff that, it's already in the report saying that I grabbed his hand.
I don't really want you to do anything.
Okay.
I'm just asking if it's in the report.
It's not, sir.
What you told the jury.
No, sir.
That's not there, right?
No.
Now in the video, if you need to see it, we're going to show it again, okay?
Yes, sir.
There are pictures of a broken vase when you first come off the elevator bank. I'm going backwards, by the way.
Yes, sir.
I'm not trying to confuse you.
It's fine.
It's 11:15 a.m. We're doing the whole thing again. You're first coming to the 6th floor.
Yes, sir.
You notice because you're observant?
Yes, sir.
You notice that there are flowers on the ground?
Yes, sir.
And you notice that there is a broken vase on the floor, true?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And that is when Mr. Combs, again, is sitting in the towel in his socks, right? And Cassie is over 2 in the corner, true?
Yes, sir.
And the flowers are closer to where Cassie is, true?
Yes, sir.
And the vase is closer to where Mr. Combs is, true?
Correct.
And in fact, we see it on the video, and it's juxtaposed because it's in the mirror. But we see that Mr. Combs is grabbing the flowers, tosses the flowers, but the vase goes down by his feet and breaks.
Correct.
True. Just want to be clear. You're not telling the jurors that Mr. Combs threw the vase, are you?
No, sir.
Okay, I'm asking you to go back 9 years. If you can't remember, say you can't remember.
Roger.
Can you describe that room? Well, different types of rooms in the Intercontinental Hotel?
It was a corner room. That's what you're talking about, his room.
2016. I'm going back, obviously, to the date at issue, March 5. Do you remember the layout of that room? If yes, can you describe it to the jury? If you can't, just say you can't remember.
No, I don't remember. It was just a corner room.
Do corner rooms have significance by that? I mean, they are better views, bigger?
Some of them do, yeah, depending on the floor.
How about the 6th floor?
No, not really.
How many, rooms? Is it like a typical hotel that I would stay in? You just walk in and it's all right there as one room? Or are there bedrooms and living rooms, bathrooms, do you remember?
Yeah, some of them have, a living room. Some of them have just the room, you open the door, and the bed is right there.
Were you aware that this room has the living room and it is not? When you first walk in, it's a living room. Have you seen those rooms before?
Yeah.
And then you go in further and there is a door and it actually leads to a bedroom. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Were you aware that this room was like that?
No, sir.
Now, you mentioned that when you see this supposed third party, the gentleman sitting in the room,
Yes, sir.
do you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, sir.
You have him on a bed, right?
Correct.
Now, you didn't go in that room further than the living room, did you?
No, sir.
How did you see into the bedroom?
So if they have a living room, those couches have pull-out, it becomes a pull-out bed.
That's what you're saying. This was a pull-out bed?
Yeah.
Did you realize that this was a presidential suite in that hotel?
Presidential suite on the 6th floor on the corner? I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
Your Honor, may I have one moment?
You may.
Now, you being in a hotel, working with a hotel, you're in hospitality. I know you're in the security business, but it's also the hospitality business, fair to say?
Yes, sir.
I mean, you have potentially presidents, dignitaries?
They stay there, yes.
I mean, heads of industry come to the hotel, right?
Yes, sir.
And there are people who are well-known who come to that hotel?
Yes, sir.
While you were working there, I'm talking about?
Yes, sir.
And you sometimes recognize people who come there just from their fame, true?
Yeah.
And that's what happened here when you got off the elevator. You recognized Mr. Combs, true?
Correct.
And you knew him from his fame, you wrote that?
Public figure, yes, sir.
And he's a public figure, true?
Yes, sir.
And it was clear to you that he wanted to pay for the damage, right?
Objection, Your Honor. It calls for speculation and mischaracterizes previous testimony.
All right, Mr. Steele, why don't you rephrase the question?
Okay, it can be embarrassing. If you know, to a public figure to have that video released. True?
Objection.
Sustained.
Your Honor, may I have 1 second?
You may.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, redirect.
Very briefly, Your Honor. Officer Florez, you were asked on cross-examination about details in incident reports. Do you remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you just remind the jury of what an incident report is?
It's just, pretty much, it's explaining what happened, what we saw, what we observed. Pretty much, like I said, the 5W.
And were you expected to include every single detail
No.
in an incident report?
No, ma'am.
And did you typically include every single detail?
No, ma'am.
Now, you were asked several questions about Mr. Combs's demeanor when you responded to the incident.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
Did Mr. Combs seem in control of his facilities?
I'm sorry.
Did Mr. Combs seem drunk?
Oh, no. No, ma'am.
Did he seem high?
No, ma'am.
Can you remind the jury what Mr. Combs said to you when he tried to hand you a stack of cash?
Pretty much saying that he doesn't want anybody to know, telling me to take care of it. I just don't want people to find out, pretty much.
Now, you were also asked several questions on cross-examination about Mr. Combs telling Ms. Ventura, "Excuse me, Cassie, that she couldn't leave." Do you remember those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you remember seeing the video that we played for you on direct examination?
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, Miss Gavin, could you play the video at 10C103, starting at 31 seconds and going to 56 seconds? Keep playing to 56 seconds, please. Officer Florez, towards the end of that snippet, did you see Mr. Combs dragging Cassie?
Yes, ma'am.
What direction was he dragging her in?
To the room.
Nothing further?
All right. Anything further, Mr. Steele?
I left something out. May I just ask a question, Your Honor?
Yes.
Not on redirect, thank you. Sir, on the videos from the surveillance, they are motion-censored videos, is that true?
Yeah.
And that means that they will not record unless there is some sort of movement. That is how it's set up. Is that true?
For the most part, yes.
So sometimes we see gaps in time,
Yes.
and that's because either there is a glitch, there is something wrong with the system, right?
Yeah.
Or there is no movement or significant movement to make the system capture an image. Is that true?
Correct.
All right. So if there is several minutes of no motion, that would explain the time difference, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me do that, Your Honor.
Ms. Slavic, did you have anything further in response to that?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Officer Florez.
Sure.
Witness excused.